This is Joe Wayne with InstinctForSurvival.com. And this is going to be one of the most informative videos you have ever watched, folks. If you are actually concerned with the entity that we call the hidden hand, the shadow government, the group that has controlled and enslaved humanity for 7,000 plus years. If you're really concerned about who the ultimate puppeteer is of all of the political puppets, of all of the corporate fascists, of all of the international bankers, like those of the Rothschild banking cartel. Yeah, if you want to know who controls all of the controllers of the mechanisms of civilization on this earth, then you will continue to watch and listen. Because in my opinion, folks, we can never hope to free ourselves until we realize who the actual enemy is. Can't target the enemy unless you know who the enemy is. Well, we're going to get right down to it. We are going to focus like a laser beam on the top of the pyramid, the civilization that has controlled every other civilization for 7,000 plus years. That's right. This civilization has never went anywhere. They simply renamed and rebranded and are still controlling the entire world today. And who is this civilization that I speak of? Well, you might have heard their name before, but you haven't heard the whole story. And we are talking about the ancient empire of Sumer, or the Sumerian Empire, that reigned from 5300 BC until today. As I said before, the group has never changed. Only their name and their brand has changed. Only the languages have changed, but the speaker of those languages has remained the same. So the Sumerian Empire ruled from 5300 BC. And if you add 2016 to 5300 BC, you come up with 7,300 years, give or take a few years, I am sure, because you have to factor in the margin of error with any poll, with any number, which is a 3% margin of error, plus or minus. So the Sumerian culture reigned from 5300 BC until around 1700 BC. Now, 1700 BC is when the Akkadians took over, or the Babylonians. There is a bit of contention. There's a bone of contention between exactly which empire ruled first. Was it the Sumerians or was it the Akkadians? Well, I go by, the old meme, the victors write the history, and the first recorded version of writing is like most things, most civilization mechanisms, civilization building mechanisms that were designed and engineered by the ancient Sumerians. We see here that the Sumerians, well, they invented the calendar. They invented the astronomy. They are the first ones to divide the heavens into 12 parts, assigning each section of the sky with a symbol. Again, they are the first ones to come up with any form of writing, and how we know this is that this writing was in the form of cuneiform, and cuneiform was simply little wedges, little triangular wedges that were depressed into wet clay and that were dried either in the sun over thousands of years or were baked in a kiln. Now, the cuneiform of writing had over 4,000 characters. The Sumerians also were very, very influential in the medical sciences. The Sumerians also created the world's first standing army. They created politics. They created money. They created, as I said, many, many of the world's first civilization building mechanisms, if not all. There is at least 100, and I will leave links to all of the Sumerians first that they had accomplished, had undertaken, have forced on the world. Now, the Sumerians and the Akkadians, they occupied some of the same territories. Here we have a list of the ruling empires of the world from Sumeria until current ruling entities of the globe. 1700 BCE, you had, we have 5300 to 1700 BCE, we had the Sumerian Empire, which gave way to the Babylonian Hittite Empire, Egyptian Babylonian Hittite Empire from 1700 to 1450 BCE. 600 BCE, we had several other empires. In 500 BCE, we have the ancient Iranian Empire or the Persian Empire. Now, what is another name for Persia? It is ancient Mesopotamia. What is another word for ancient Mesopotamia? Of course, it's Sumer, or the Sumerian Empire. 323, you have the Alexander the Great's empire, the Hellenistic Empire. 117 AD, you have the Roman and Parthian empires. 486 AD, you have the Eastern Roman Empire, the dominion of the Ghassanids and the dominion of the Sassanids. 632 CE to present, the Arab and Caliphate empires of the Middle East. Now, very, very interesting. And here we have, folks, a little part of history from actual historians that will tell you whether one considers themselves Russian, Bosnian, Serbian, Albanian, Croatian, or Macedonian. There is no valid criticism for establishing such nationalisms. Just as the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe, using the Khazar example, are more or less of the same racial stock. And if you have watched this channel before, on this new channel, there's a couple, I think there's one other video that goes into a little bit of detail pertaining to the Khazarians, that in 740 AD moved down to what is now known as Jerusalem, or Israel, more specifically. And they usurped the Jewish identity, the Jewish religion, the Jewish name, and started calling themselves Jews. They are not Jews. Genetically, they are Khazarian. They call themselves Ashkenazi Jews. They are Khazarian genetically. To be a literal Jew, you have to be able to tie your genetic bloodline to none other than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, whenever the Jews are the so-called Jews, which are actually 98+% genetically Khazar, whenever they scream anti-Semite, well, they're not really lying, because to be a Semite or a Semitic culture, it doesn't mean that you're Jewish. It simply means that you or your culture at one time spoke Hebrew. It also refers to Semitic regions of the Middle East and the Near East, but it is not referring to the Jewish, or rather the genetic Jewish person. Now, here in a few moments, we are going to look at a map. Well, let's go ahead and do that now. If you will look, folks, if you will look at the region, look at the map that I am showing you right now. Now, you will have the Sumerian culture that began it all, that are genetically no different than any other of the empires that have controlled the world from the time of Sumer to today. And you will see, folks, that they started in Sumer, which was basically ancient Iran, ancient Iraq, or if you want to go ahead and put the whole thing together, it was known as ancient Mesopotamia. Now, after they left Sumer, and here's what they do, folks. This one group that started in Sumer, the oligarchs, the ancient oligarchs of the time that are today's oligarchs, they started in Sumer. And you will notice, folks, that from ancient Iran or Iraq, or Iran for that matter, Egypt is just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Now, what they did is they traveled from Sumer to Egypt and Babylon, went across the Mediterranean to Rome. And then they have basically, and this is the same group, folks, it's the same group of oligarchs that will use up the resources, but it's not simply about the resources. What it's more specifically about is, once this group has destroyed and ruled any region, after a certain amount of time, you will, if you're any type of human being with any type of mental facilities, if you're not a vegetable, after a while you're going to start to realize who is ruling you, who is enslaving you.
Everybody I talk to who's been in combat is more awake than the public. Then I talk to special forces people across the board. They're the most awake people I talk to. I talk to a lot of cops. They're awake as well. But then I see the power structure doing bad stuff, but then the very members of the structure that do the enforcement are some of the best people I know. Have you found that paradox? Have you found that number, that statistic? And what does that represent? Because if true, from what I've seen, that's got to freak out some of the bad guys. They're not all bad at the top. It's got to freak them out knowing that their own foot soldiers are awake.
They have to be scared to death. When you look at the body of the American Special Operations community, they're guys like me. They are trained, they're educated, they're smart, they're well-traveled, multilingual, and we understand the bigger picture of things. They wish, they probably do, they wish that they could just hang back and have a bunch of lemmings that they could tell, hey, go get rid of these people, go destroy this culture, this way of life. But that's not how it is. You have very, very intelligent people that are finally seeing the big picture. You know, it's like we've peeked behind and seen, you know, the guy that's pulling all the strings, and we're done with it. We understand, and now we're taking action to hopefully affect change.
And that's
So whenever these regions or these empires would start to fail because of military, overstepping their boundaries, or the oligarchs, completely ruling and decimating the people and the economies of these regions, right? And at a certain point, you have what's called a choke point or a breaking point, or what is currently known as an aha moment, where you realize who is ruling you, who is enslaving you. And this is what happens. They will get to a point to where they are outed, and they will have to move on to a different region. Okay? Now today, the group from Sumer that is currently and that has been ruling us for many, many years, okay? Since for 7,300 years at a minimum. Now, as I said, their MO has remained the same. In 740 AD, this group basically that is ruling us today, they're known as the Zionists.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I speak to you today as a lifelong supporter and true friend of Israel. I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state.
In 1948, Jews throughout the Middle East faced murder and extermination and fled to the nation of Israel. And today, Christians have no greater ally than the Jewish state. Let me say this. Those who hate Israel hate America. And those who hate Jews hate Christians. And if this room will not recognize that, then my heart weeps that the men and women here will not stand in solidarity with Jews and Christians alike who are persecuted by radicals who seek to murder them. If you hate the Jewish people, you are not reflecting the teachings of Christ. And the very same people who persecute and murder Christians right now, who crucify Christians, who behead children, are the very same people who target and murder Jews for their faith for the same reason. I will say this. I am saddened.
Please, respect for dialogue. Respect, please, we're in America.
I will say this, I am saddened to see that some here, not everyone, but some here, are so consumed with hate that you cannot address your brother. I will say this. If you will not stand with Israel and the Jews, then I will not stand with you. Thank you, and God bless you.
but they are actually Khazarian. They're not Jews, okay? They are Zionist Khazars that are genetically no different than the Sumerians, the Egyptians, hell, the Romans, okay? And the Roman Empire is one of the most of the current empires that we still remember, that we still really glob onto as a ruling entity. And this is because the Roman Empire, just like the Sumerian empires, the Egyptian Empire, the Babylonian empires, the Hellenistic empires, okay? They are all the same group. They simply had to rebrand, just as the Roman Empire, whenever they fell, had to rebrand as what? Of course, the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican, which is still really basically controlling everything with the Khazarian Zionist. Okay? Rome is still in charge, and the Rothschild banking cartel, which is the head of the Khazarian tribe, the Zionist Khazarian tribe, are the accountants for the Vatican. Okay? That's where the Khazars come in. So, what were the reasons the Roman Empire fell? Now, these reasons that we are going to go over will, if you're awake, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you will recognize these MO as being connected to the United States, the Weimar Republic, and every other empire that has fallen. Number one, the invasion by barbarian tribes. Again, and these are the reasons why the Roman Empire failed. 2, economic troubles with over-reliance on slave labor. I'm sure a lot of us can say amen to that as it pertains to the United States. The rise of the Eastern Empire, over-expansion and military overspending, government corruption and political instability, the arrival of the Huns and the migration of the barbarian tribes. Again, the Huns, as in Attila the Hun, or Attila the Hungarian, was related to genetically Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, and the rest of the Khazarians, which in 740 AD moved down to what is today Israel and had to steal the Jewish name, the Jewish identity, and the Jewish religion because the Khazars had burned their bridges on both sides. They were a 50,000 man army of mercenaries. This is what they would do. The Khagans at the time are the kings. A Khagan is a Khazarian king. They would rent out their 50,000 man mercenary army, and they would work for a king who didn't want to decimate his own army. They would go and fight for that king. Now, they would not only rape, pillage, and burn the opposition side that the king had paid them to fight against, but they would then rape, pillage, and burn the kingdom that had just paid them to fight their opposition. So the Khazars had burnt their bridges on both sides. At that time, they had to move down, and basically they were ran out of their ancestral homelands, which were where? In the Caucasus Mountains, okay? With the Black Sea on one side, the Caspian Sea on the other side, Hungarian right there, okay? Now, if you want to go ahead and look at the map again, folks, you will see that the Khazarian Empire is directly below what is today's Russia. Okay? Directly below. I mean, they could very easily, the Khazarians, which are now calling themselves since 740 AD, Jews. Okay, this is where the whole Bolshevik revolution began. Okay, it was the Khazarian Zionist Jews who went into Russia, and Joseph Stalin was indeed a Khazarian Zionist who, as I said, since 740 AD, have been calling themselves not Khazars anymore, but Jews. Okay, so this same group, which have been controlling and lying and stealing and killing people around the globe, well, they're not really Jews. They are Zionists, but they are Khazar Zionists. If you want to go further back, they're Roman Zionists. They are Sumerian Zionists. Okay? This is the same group. Moving on, number 7 in the reasons why Rome fell, we have number 6, the arrival of the Huns and the migration of the barbarian tribes. Number 7, Christianity and the loss of traditional values. I mean, come on, can I get an amen on that one, folks? I mean, from Bruce, excuse me, that is now Caitlyn Jenner, from his Armenian, excuse me, Khazarian, or Sumerian family members, the Kardashians. And I'm not sure if a lot of you guys really know who the Kardashians are, but if you remember OJ, you know, if you're my age, I'll be 50 here in another month or so. If you're of my age, then you will remember Robert Kardashian of OJ fame or infamy. Kardashian was the lawyer that was beside OJ from the very beginning of OJ committing the crime that he did commit, killing those 2 individuals, Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown. Well, Kardashian was the guy who jetted off with the big black duffel bag that everyone was looking for that probably had the knife in it, okay? Kardashian was the father, the husband of Kris Jenner at the time, and the father of Kim Kardashian, Khloe Kardashian, and all the rest of the Kardashians, the brother and the other sister, okay? They're all connected. They own Hollywood, folks. I mean, why else would somebody with no talents in acting or any other arena all of a sudden become the world's biggest celebrity without cause? Okay. She's famous for nothing except having a big fat ass and her willingness to show it to the world. Those are who the Kardashians are. Those are the same Kardashians from Armenia, from Sumeria, or from Sumer, that are integral. The chains that are still wrapped firmly around the entire world. Because until we recognize who this group is, we will never be free, folks. Well, not only did Rome have, some serious problems that were created and manipulated by the oligarchs who created the Roman Empire, who created the Egyptian Empire, who created the Babylonian Empire and the Sumerian Empire. They're all the same group, folks. All the same group. Well, they manipulated Hitler. No, I do not agree with Hitler, but this same group manipulated Hitler. And whenever the Germans started figuring out who they were and what they were doing, I mean, I'm not sure if you folks know this, but the story of the 6 million Jews that were killed, okay, this story was going out to many, 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 and it was being attributed to many, many, many different groups, many different geographical locations and individuals. They had claimed a full 20 to 25 years before Hitler was even a thought that 3 million Jews were killed, that 6 million Jews were in jeopardy of being killed over here in the Ukraine. They were in jeopardy of being killed in Russia. They were in jeopardy of being killed everywhere but where they were finally, agreed upon, I guess, their death 20 to 25 years later. That was lied about 20 to 25 years previously in all of the Zionist-owned newspapers of the world. Well, even the New York Times of the day, folks, they all lied about this 6 million Jews being killed. Now, they manipulated the situation. Once again, Germany had woken up to who the enemy really was, and they were going to do something about it, okay? Because, again, you can only take so much bullying, you can only take so much lying to and deceiving before you finally break and say, to hell with it, damn the torpedoes, we are going to fight and we are going to defend ourselves. We are going to fight the enemy. We are going to wake the world to who the enemy is. Well, they lost. And why did they lose? Why could they not finally wake up the world? Because they were manipulated by the Bush family. Okay, Prescott Bush funded and manipulated Hitler's rise so that they could then destroy Hitler and put in the U.S. as the new supreme power. And in 1944, there was an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement that basically said that the world would start using one common currency to buy and sell over the globe its oil in. That one currency was the U.S. dollar. Okay? So that's whenever the U.S. and, another little false flag that got us into that war was Pearl Harbor. And if you remember, well, if you will do the research as I have, they knew the Japanese planes were coming, but they decided not to act, or they were told to stand down. The general or the admiral that was in charge of the Fifth Fleet decided to stand down and ignore the warnings because he was told to by FDR. Okay? They had to have a reason to get us into the war. Now, they had tried bombing one of our boats, the Israelis did, and that didn't get us into the war. So they had to ramp it up. Then came Pearl Harbor. Then we got into the war because Germany, again, was waking up to who the actual enemy was, and they were trying to wake the world. I don't agree with anybody killing any group of people. I don't have really anything against the Ashkenazi Jews who think they are actual literal Jews from the lineage of Abraham, Jacob, or Isaac. They're genetically not Jews, they're Khazars, okay? It's not their fault that they don't know any better, but most people don't have the ability or the attention span to research and follow history, okay? That's boring to most people, but in my opinion, this is a fight for our very soul, our lives, our minds, our bodies, our souls. This is a fight to the death, because if we do not wake the world to who this group is, We can never hope to beat this group. We can never hope to beat the enemy until we figure out as a planet who the enemy is, who the hidden hand belongs to that has been controlling the world for 7,000 plus years. They did it to Rome. They did it to Germany. Now they are doing it to America. Because just like Rome and just like Germany, they forced an invasion on our country. They forced opened, their corporate fascists, their corporate oligarchs that they own, forced open our borders, forced our border agents to stand down. They have destroyed our economy. We are now heading towards a $21 trillion debt. They are doing the same thing they have always done. But since we don't study history, the human species has lost the ability to study history and learn history. And if the human being that has a shorter attention span than the goldfish currently, how can that same human being ever expect to learn from history since we have not studied our history? We don't remember our history. How can we ever hope to learn from our history and combat the 7,000 plus year old enemy? The 7,000 plus year old hidden hand that has the entire planet and has had the entire planet in a 7,300 year old sleeper hold. Well, we can't. And until we do, we are most assuredly going to die as a race because of our own complacency and our inability to study history, remember history, and in so doing, study and remember the enemy, our collective enemy of humanity. Well, this is Joe Wayne with InstinctForSurvival.com, trying to give you a hand up so that you can lift yourself up, so we can lift ourselves up as a species so that we can continue to thrive and stay alive. This is Joe Wayne with InstinctForSurvival.com. God bless and good luck. Who the ultimate puppeteer is of all of the political puppets, of all of the corporate fascists, of all of the international bankers, like those of the Rothschild banking cartel. Yeah, if you want to know who controls all of the controllers of the mechanisms of civilization on this earth, then you will continue to watch and listen. Because in my opinion, folks, we can never be renamed and rebranded and are still controlling the entire world today. And who is this civilization that I speak of? Well, you might have heard their name before, but you haven't heard the whole story. And we are talking about the ancient empire of Sumer, or the Sumerian Empire, that reigned from 5300 BC until today. As I said before, the group has never changed, only their name and their brand. Hope to free ourselves until we realize who the actual enemy is. Can't target the enemy unless you know who the enemy is. Well, we're going to get right down to it. We are going to focus like a laser beam on the top of the pyramid, the civilization that has controlled every other civilization for 7,000 plus years. That's right. This civilization has never went anywhere. They simply This is Joe Wayne with InstinctForSurvival.com. And this is going to be one of the most informative videos you have ever watched, folks. If you are actually concerned with the entity that we call the hidden hand, the shadow government, the group that has controlled and enslaved humanity for 7,000 plus years. If you're really concerned about